right, so it is now official. There are 30.8 million of us in Ghana, according to the Provisional 2021 Population and Housing Census figures released by the Ghana Statistical Service. The preliminary report was released yesterday and it's already generated interesting chatter on social media and elsewhere, as you'd expect with census data. So if you take, for instance, the sex ratio, the women outnumber the men, and there's been all sorts of interpretations being put to that data. That's what we're going to do here, and that's what the government statistician, who has joined us in the studio, Professor Anim. Thank you very much for making time to be in the studio with us, and we'll be having a very interesting conversation. There's also the number of uncompleted buildings and container structures and kiosks, which speaks to the housing problem, which for us at JoyNews, it affirms why the EcoBank JoyNews Habitat Fair is very, very relevant. So, yes, there's a whole lot more that we're getting, the information that we're picking up from the census data that was released yesterday. And it turns out it's not even the final one. They have a lot more elaborate data that they're going to be releasing from the census. For those of you who we were counted, and you were wondering, okay, so what's all that for? This is a conversation that you need to stay tuned in, because we're going to break it all down for you. So thank you very much, Prof. Sening, for joining us once again. So yes, yesterday I must say I was quite impressed with the delivery and the way you excited. I mean, you excited me. I'm sure you excited a lot of people, and the information that you're providing and what it could be used for. I'm sure there are lots of businesses who are excited and can't wait to get their hands on data like this, and government as well, which will be using it for policy planning and all of that. But yes, you're here, and I would want you to start off by telling us some of the highlights, going over some of the highlights that you had you found.
Thank you very much, Israel, and I'm indeed delighted to continue this conversation. As you rightly said, this is a decennial activity and it takes a lot to do this exercise. So once it's done, it's important to walk through the entire process to ensure that the end result is achieved. So some of the highlights that we put out yesterday, the first one obviously is what you've indicated. Ghana's population from the provisional results stands at 30.8 million persons. And it is important to look at this from a trend perspective and also from a composition perspective. So from a trend perspective, the highlight is that since independence, our population has grown fivefold. In 1960, when we did the census, Ghana's population was 6.7. It went up to 8.6 in 1970. Further went up to 12.3 in 1984, and then we had 18.9 in 2000, 2010, 24.7, and now we are at 30.8. If you look at these trends, it clearly shows that our population is growing, but is growing at a declining rate. And what that means is that the highest growth, intercensal growth that we saw on an annual basis was 2.7 between 1984 and 2000. And we've reached our lowest ever level, which is 2.1 between 2010 and 2021. What this means is that it has implications on the households, average household sizes that we have. In 2010, the average household size in Ghana was 5.1. This has gone down by 1.5 percentage points, and currently our average household size in Ghana is 3.6. Right. Again, this average household size connotes the lowest level ever recorded since independence, after inching up to 2000, since 2000 when we reached 2010 when we reached 5.1, okay. Now it is at 3.6. On the front of the structures, please go ahead.
Just to hold on that, staying with that point, if we're having the average households being 3.6, essentially if you take any household, there are 3.6 persons in there. Of course, we're not saying that you can't have 3.6 persons, but essentially it gives you a fair idea that there are just about 4 people. I believe that also speaks to how family planning issues are being adopted. Essentially, it sounds like more people are having smaller families. Is that fair to say?
I would approach this from two perspectives. Right. One is we need to be clear in our minds the distinction between the concept of household as we use in censuses and other surveys and family sizes, right, and the drivers of these. So from our point of view, a household is simply either a person or more than one person that come together and make living arrangements. They decide on what to eat, they decide on the major things they need to buy, and they identify somebody as the head of the household, okay, which is clearly different from the family concept as we all know. And what might be driving this reduction in average household size could be one at the household level, as you rightly said, fertility might be going down, and that is why we talked about every discussion on population changes should focus on three things: fertility, mortality, and migration. But at the household level, the extent to which mortality will drive the average household sizes is minimal relative to fertility and migration, because you have control on the number of children you want to have, you have control on whether you want to travel out or not. But the other thing that we need to think about is the nuclear family that is evolving in terms of people staying just by themselves, and that is what we call the concept of nucleation. And once that is happening, and we all agree that when people had to live with other people, other members that either related or not, that sort of arrangement is sort of dwindling down as we get into this, as we are in this century.
Okay, so we're done with the household. So you're making the point on the other things.
So the other side of the presentation that we put out there yesterday had to do with the concept of structures. And again, yesterday we said, based on the provisional results, Ghana has 10.7 million structures. And I'm always careful how we carry these messages along, because if you don't define the concept of structures very well, people might interpret it as conventional buildings and put other interpretation to it. So from our point of view, a structure is any independent or separate building or an enclosure which is at different levels of completion. It means that it could be fully completed or uncompleted, and also which is movable or unmovable. So in that space, we have different types of structures, i.e. conventional structures or conventional buildings for that matter, that is made of concrete, concrete, cement, mud, and the others which we call non-conventional, that is metal containers, kiosks, wooden structures, and the last group is other. So the 10.7 is made up of all this. And out of the 10.7, we were able to identify those that are used for residential purposes and those that are used for non-residential purposes. Obviously, we had a number of uncompleted buildings that we were unable to determine whether they were going to be used for residential or non-residential. And of the 10.7, 9.8, we were able to make a determination of it. And out of that, clearly, we had 55% out of that being residential, that is where people are staying, and the 45% being non-residential. The other thing that we did, as I indicated, is the different types of structures. And this is where we need to begin to think through it as a country in terms of the structures that we have and its implications for housing. As at this stage, we are not defining the housing deficit. Right. But clearly from yesterday's results, we put out there that 1 in every 5 structure that we have in the country is uncompleted.
And that's a significant.
1 in every 5 structure is uncompleted. And this is predominantly found in places that we all expect to see them, i.e. Ashanti region having the highest number of uncompleted structures, obviously followed by Greater Accra. And what happened in the space of Greater Accra is, although it had the highest number of structures, of the 9.8 million structures that we had, 2.1 of them are in Greater Accra. Besides that, you find that 15% of the 2.1 structures are metal containers. Okay. So all the metal containers that we have in the country, 15% of it is found in Greater Accra. And if we move to wooden structures, more than 50% of the wooden structures that we have in the country are also in Greater Accra. Okay. So this is certainly what should incite policymakers to begin to look out for the more detailed analysis, where we're going to talk about the type of housing that we have and the quality of the housing that we have. And more importantly, juxtapose that with the number of people who are living in the household. then we'll begin to appreciate the housing stock that we have, the deficit that we have, and as I've rightly explained, what is important is the disaggregation across the regions and across the districts. And the essence of the census is that lower level disaggregation. So we are not even going to end at just the district level. We're going to provide this information across all the over 130,000 localities that we have. And this is exactly why we say this exercise in terms of the dissemination indeed is the most important part of the census exercise.
And for that matter, is the most important part
of the census exercise.
Why so?
Because that is where the transition occurs, where whatever we've done, it goes to the policymakers. So we need to communicate it, package it in such a way that it will be readily used by the policymakers. Because at the end of the day, that is the objective, the uptake of the data.
Are the policy makers not supposed to be already aware of how to use the data? I mean, if you're talking about lay people like us, then you say you'd want to excite us or get us to understand why the data is crucial. But for policymakers, I'm thinking they should already know.
I think it's an assumption that one would have to reflect on it and say whether policymakers are aware. From my point of view, they might be aware of it. Right. From my point of view, they might be using it, but we are concerned about the extent to which they are using it and how they are using it. I mean, everybody can say that we are 30.8 million, but that is not the discussion. The discussion is what has happened to Greater Accra between 2010 and 2021. Greater Accra has caught up with the population of Ashanti region, with each of these regions having 5.4. So which ministry is going to sit down and say that, or which multi-sectorial group is going to sit down and say that this is the conversation that we need to have? Because if you sum the 6 least populous regions in the country, you don't get the 5.4 million that we have sitting in Greater Accra and Ashanti region. So clearly, it is not a one ministry affair. We should have a coordinated approach to the issue of population because different ministries are responsible for the different results that we are putting out there. And from my point of view, that is what is missing, that coordination, that harmonization to deal with multidisciplinary, intersectoral issues. And that is where we are pushing the conversation to.
And the population figures between comparing Greater Accra and Ashanti region also has implications for density because you're finding out that a lot more people are concentrated in Greater Accra per square mile or per kilometer as compared with the Ashanti region. What does the data tell you as far as population density is concerned in these two regions?
Thank you very much, Israel, for bringing this up. I left it out in the highlights, but this is indeed one of the striking things that as a country we should pay attention to. I mean, Greater Accra's population density, which we define as persons living in every square kilometer, is over 1,678 or 1,658. Yesterday in the presentation, I said, let's literally interpret what a square kilometer is. If you think about a square kilometer as 1,000 meters, so a square of 1,000 meters, and you have over 1,600 people living in that, it means you have about 1.6 people, 1.6 people literally living in every meter. So about 2 people living in every meter. Okay. Think about this from the perspective of how diseases can easily spread. So it is not just a matter of the pressure on the land, but it's a matter of the pressure and the implications of the crowding that we are getting in Greater Accra. Yeah. Greater Accra is the only region that between 2010 and 2021, population density, we are seeing a change of 442 persons per square kilometer. When nationally, we are seeing just about 25 persons per square kilometer. Okay, so let's take that in slowly. So you're saying for Greater Accra, we're seeing 442. Change. 442. Yes. The rest of the country, 25. 25. That's significant. 25. And this calls for a national discourse on how we are concentrating everything in Greater Accra. And the big question in there is the inequality. Because we all talk about poverty, but nobody talks about inequality. But what we are presenting now clearly presents inequality. So therefore, people are moving from one area to another area in search of whatever resource they think it's there. So there's clearly concentration in the southern part of the country, but much more concentrated in Greater Accra.
So this is what we describe as the rural-urban drift. So it is real. It's not something that's ending. And you'd want to think that there are several other urban communities, so people will move to those urban communities. There's Kumasi, there's Takrady, there's Cape Coast, and all those other places. But it appears everybody is moving to Accra.
And Israel, this is what I said. What policymakers are not paying attention to is the extent. So everybody knows that there is urbanization. People are moving from rural areas to urban areas. But what we are not discussing is the extent. Greater Accra has 1,658 persons for every square kilometer. The next region is Central Region, and the difference between Central Region and Greater Accra is sixfold, which is the next densely populated region. So Central Region has close to 291 persons per square kilometer. That is the next region after Greater Accra. And this is the inequality that I'm talking about. So there are clearly disparities across all the indicators that we put out there, be it the structures, be it the people, be it the density, the average household sizes. Even with the average household sizes, we put out there that Greater Accra and Ashanti and Eastern Region have an average household size of 3.2, and then you shoot up to 6.0 for the Northern Region. Sorry, for the Northeast Region. Yeah. These are stark disparities across the regions.
Well, for the Northeast region, you can say that is a newly created region, and so it's not as densely populated. People are now getting to know about it, so that's why you'd say there will be a lot less people in there.
No, this is about the average household size.
Right.
So the average household size in Greater Accra is 3.2.
Yeah.
So the nucleation is happening in Greater Accra. Whereas in the Northeast region, the Northern region, and Savannah region, they are all recording an average household size in excess of 5.
Oh, okay.
So this is about the average household size.
All right.
And this has implications on decision making within the household in terms of how they decide on what to buy and who gets what.
So if you take population density, for instance, and the issue with Greater Accra, what would you expect, or how do you expect policy makers to make use of this data?
This is why we say that this is the preliminary report. And we are saying on the 18th of November, we're going to give the general report.
Right.
And the general report will differ from the preliminary report from 3 perspectives. We're going to announce the final figures, which from my point of view, it's not the major issue. The major issue is when we provide the information at the disaggregated level, and then we do a wider analysis in terms of the scope. So what we should look out for is, in Greater Accra, where are the hotspots when it comes to population density? So that's the first thing we should find out. Once we identify the districts with the hotspots, we look out for the localities with the hotspots. And this is the data that we're going to provide at the disaggregated level. Then the flip side is that we're going to provide that data in relation to other indicators. So for instance, where there is density, we can compare it with indicators such as economic activity. We can compare it with indicators such as child survival. We can compare it with indicators such as people with difficulty in performing activities. So we're going to do that cross-tabulation so that policymakers will see how densely populated areas at the small area level is impacting on other socioeconomic indicators. So moving into our thematic and analytical report, we're going to put these analyses out there. Okay,
so the disaggregated data that you're talking about, is that the one that's supposed to come out in November, or we should expect that to come over the 2-year period that you've been talking about?
The disaggregated data, that is at the district level. So now we've provided the results at the regional level. The results at the district level, or the 261 administrative districts, would come up on the 18th of November.
Oh, just this November?
Just 18th of November. And then between May next year and December next year, we're going to have our thematic report, and the cross-tabulations that I talked about would come up. And this is why we, for the first time, have collected information on GPS coordinates. So what the GPS coordinates would allow us to do is what we call small area analysis. So we don't just do the analysis at, let's say, Adabraka, but within Adabraka, we can narrow down on a particular small area, obviously anonymize it, and see how population density in these hotspots correlates with other indicators.
And talking about GPS coordinates and digitization, you've talked about how digitization has helped greatly in putting together the census report. I want you to break it down for us and let us know what sort of difference it's made.
Israel, the first difference is that we've been able to put out these results within 44 days after the data collection. In 2010, it took us over 6 months to get the provisional results.
Okay.
And prior to 2010, in 2000, it was more than a year. So immediately the benefit that we've seen is the timeliness of the data that we've put out there. But obviously that does not bring a lot to the table. But the added value is the things that you are talking about. Because we're doing a digital census, we're able to pick the GPS coordinates, and the GPS coordinate is what we're going to use for the kind of analysis that I've talked about. And the quality that it's embedded in the data collection process. For the first time in the history of our data collection exercise, we're able to correct all the errors that were coming up during the data collection. We're able to superimpose some benchmark data. So for instance, we use geospatial resources such as building footprints to superimpose on the number of structures that we're having. So in the northern part of the country where we have different kinds of structures, where the satellite images were not able to pick them up, we're able to compare to see how that happens in the other part of the country where we have the conventional structures. So these were the resources that we were able to superimpose on the tablet that we use for the data collection. So we always say that the digitization was not just about the use of tablets, but harnessing the resourcefulness of using tablets, i.e. building an enumeration tracker where the data that is coming in. So indeed, after the first day of the data collection, we're able to measure the progress. We're able to see areas that will not finish, enumerators that were working in enumeration areas that we did not send them to. So all these attributes improve the quality of the data that we have. And then, as I said, the GPS coordinate is offering that additional benefit from the use from a digital census.
So listening to you this morning, you're speaking, you've said so much, you've put out data, and you're not referring to any document. I'm getting that this thing is sitting in your head. You sleep statistics and you talk statistics. You say it so easily. I suspect that you're also very excited by the work that you've done. What are some of the highlights for you?
Indeed, I'm excited simply because of my background as a data person. But my excitement is the way we started the presentation yesterday and some of the issues that are coming up already in terms of the use of the data. And it's always important not just to look at the numbers, but the story around the numbers, which is very important, and also use platforms like this to educate people on the use of numbers. If you don't mind, let me mention that since yesterday, some of the commentary that I'm receiving is persons in Ghana or beyond, trying to juxtapose the numbers that we've put out there with the voters' registration.
Okay.
I want to put it out there that we need to be very careful, even if we have to have that conversation. I would not advise that conversation, but if for some reason you want to have that conversation, we need to be careful. For the following reasons. The census operations or methodology is what we call the de facto. And what that means is that we counted people where they were on the 27th of June 2021. That is pretty different from the elections operations, which requires that people decide on where they want to vote.
True.
So for you to do that comparison, one has to be careful about that.
I agree.
The timing for the census and the timing for elections has an age cutoff because the elections is for only people 18 years and above.
Now, Prof, I'm curious. I'm sure it will help if you share with us some of the ways people are interpreting or misinterpreting this data. That's as far as voting and elections is concerned.
So they're comparing the turnout of the elections at the regional level with the population that we've put out there. They've already started having that conversation.
I don't see...
It is a bit bizarre, especially when we don't have the ages in the data that we put out there. And you know that elections is 18 years and above,
yes.
and then census is everybody. So now people say, let's take a percentage of this, But the caution that I'm putting out there is, even when we put the final results out, because of the differences in the operations, it is not advisable to compare.
And it's true, as you're saying, people would actually move from one part of the country to another part of the country to go register to vote when it comes to elections. Yes. But it doesn't happen like that when it's with the census.
No. So, I mean, I'm using this as an example. That is why, as much as possible, I define the concepts, I talk about the processes so that it will be properly used. What we all need to guard against is misuse of statistics. And that is where my desire is, driving home the point in what we call the metadata. People read the documentary around the data so that the data will be properly used.
Okay, so that's one of the issues you say you wanted to put out. What are some of the... I'm thinking that there's so much in you as far as, or so much you've seen that you're probably not sure, okay, so there's so much you want to talk about. So which are some of the other highlights for you?
I think I would go back to the results that we talked about. And Israel, why would we have more than 50% of all kiosks in the country in Greater Accra? I think now what policymakers should begin to do is send us interesting things that they want to hear. So, for instance, the Ministry of Works and Housing should by now be interested in this, asking Ghana Statistical Service, of this 51%, how many of them are residential?
Right.
Because if you have kiosks and they are residential, then one would have to worry about the quality of the kiosk, even if you want to have that conversation.
But it's also common knowledge that most of these kiosks that are supposed to be used for businesses, people sleep in them as well.
So this is exactly what I'm saying. It gives us the opportunity to interrogate the data to confirm what you are saying. Because if it's a lotto kiosk and people are sleeping in it, and we are getting into the rainy season, and you know floods are bound. I mean, these are the conversations that we need to have, so that the ministry will sit down with the meteorological agencies, Ghana Statistical Service, and begin to think about how do we avert these problems. If we do not do anything, we will say that it wasn't anticipated. Yeah. But clearly the conversation that we are having, we should not talk about unanticipated events.
And again, I'm thinking about it. If it's a lotto kiosk or a kiosk which doesn't have a toilet facility, you want to find out where are the people defecating.
Thank you very much. I mean, this is what we're going to put out there in our thematic report. So in our thematic report, you know we have a sanitation model, how people dispose of their waste. And then, as you rightly said, these people that they do that, they dispose their waste indiscriminately, what are their living arrangements? In terms of whether they are living in kiosks or they are living in conventional structures. And who would think about somebody living in a conventional structure to indiscriminately put out its waste?
All right. Now let's move to the sex ratio. So people just pick the figures and they're saying, okay, so the women outnumber the men by 400,000. And some who are actually spinning and saying, oh, it means there are a lot more women that need husbands. But that is also a different conversation altogether. Help us break this one down and analyze it.
Yes, I mean, yesterday we did indicate that females outnumber males in excess of 427,000. And I keep emphasizing that that is the national figure. It's just for conversation.
Yeah.
What we should focus on is the disaggregation. And as you rightly said, we disaggregate by region, which is what we've done now, and then we disaggregate by different age caps, so that we find out whether the variations in the sex composition is concentrated among persons less than 15 years, among the youth, or among the elderly.
So that disaggregation hasn't happened?
Hasn't happened yet.
We should expect that in November.
In November. We're going to put out the age-sex disaggregation. But what we've put out here in terms of disaggregation is at the regional level. So we have identified 10 of the 16 regions that females outnumber males, with Volta region leading the chart of 4.7 percentage difference. For me, the key conversation is, why do you have another 6 regions that males outnumber females, with Western North leading the dominance of males over females? So then we begin to ask questions, and this is what we need to look out for in the 18th November report. Because in the 18th November report, we're going to cross-tabulate this sex composition with occupation. So some of our early thoughts are that...
Okay.
You understand? Which is a male-dominated activity. But then this is just our expectation.
Yeah.
But once we do the...
Our
suspicion. But once we do the analysis, cross-tabulate, and that is one of the things that we do. We cross-tabulate sex and age with all the variables. Because these are the key variables that you want to see how they are playing out with all your other socioeconomic and housing and sanitation variables. So indeed, there's a lot we need to look out for, and that is why we said that this census would, at the minimum, give Ghana 2.6 million indicators. So really, there's a lot that we have to do with the data in the next 10 years.
All right, so we have some questions coming through. We have this one. The data from the census puts Greater Accra as the most populous. What does it mean to have more people in Accra than Kumasi for urbanization and city planning? We touched on it, but if you could just elaborate.
It has... I'm being careful with my choice of words, but permit me to say it has dire implications for the country in terms of our population concentration when we are not paying attention to the needed amenities and the resources that we have in these respective regions. But from my point of view, it goes beyond the infrastructure. There are certain things that you can control, i.e. infrastructure, but there are other things that you cannot control, and this is what I talked about. Health. So once you have constraint on your resources, i.e. the land that you have and what you can put on the land, and you maximize that, there are other things that you cannot control, and that is what we need to think about. This really is calling for a wake-up call on how we are distributing our resources over the 238,000 square kilometer land that we have. And especially when you see that the regions in the northern part of the country are not as densely populated as the regions in the southern part.
That's interesting. So, again, staying with the sex ratio, we're having, you're saying, about 5 regions. 6 regions where the men outnumber the women.
Yes.
And then the other regions is where we see the national situation where it looks like the females. Which regions are these? The 6?
The 6, I need to reference that, but I know it's it's Western North that is leading that, and it's followed by Western, Ahafo, Oti, Savannah, and Bono East. So these are the 6 regions that we have males outnumbering females.
Okay. And then when we look, you make your point.
Yes, no, I was just going to mention some of the, obviously the other 10 is obvious once we know that 6.
So when we also look at the way the sex ratio has been over the years, you're saying that it looks like we're having the men now catching up.
No, I don't think I've made that submission yet.
All right. So let's get into that. So previously, we've for a long time had the women outnumbering the men, but when you look at the ratio, it looks like the gap is closing. Is that the case?
I need to be certain about that because I've not paid particular attention. But you are right. Over the period, we've consistently had females outnumbering males, but the extent to which it's narrowing down is something that we need to look into.
All right. The other question that a lot of people, when I posted it on Facebook, many people are talking about is, I wasn't counted. And yet they're saying that they have the census figures. We are 30.8 million. How do you explain that to the people who, I know there will be margin of error and all of that, but you probably have a better explanation.
So let me precede that with a caution of a claim that I was not counted. Per the operations of the census, we were not going to have a one-on-one engagement with all the 30.8 million people that we've identified in the country. Our unit of the data collection was either the household or the individual, depending on where we find you. So if you are in transit, then we'll speak to you as a person, as an example. If you're an outdoor sleeper, then we'll speak to you as a person. But if you are in a household, which our data suggested that more than 30 million out of the 30.8 million were household population, the household was our unit. And what that meant was that once we get in there and we identify the head of the household or identify any adult responsible, that person speaks on behalf of all the other persons in the household. So if you have a strong thought that you were not counted, we kindly request that you find out from other members of your family to confirm that indeed the household was not visited or not. Having said that, why we initially put out, one of the reasons why we put out a provisional result and the final result is to contain some of the places that we had challenges with the enumeration.
All right.
So specifically for places like Adan West, that shares border with, I think, Central Tong, we had a boundary issues, and we had specific localities in those areas that after we had listed, which we got the de jure population, that is usual members in there, when we went there for the enumeration, we were denied the enumeration. It dragged on for a while. We had meetings here and there. Why
were they denied?
Because of the boundary issues. They thought that the locality should belong here and vice versa. So it was back and forth. So that particular locality, which indeed their population is in the hundreds, we were not able to do the enumeration in that area. So between now and 18 November, we're going to make a determination on how to estimate that population.
Is that just one of those, or there are a few others?
No, we had just 2 instances. And these are not districts. These are localities within the districts.
All right.
And there are places too that we have challenges because of accessibility, some of these gated communities, which we are going to estimate the numbers.
Gated communities?
Yes, which we are going to estimate the numbers.
Why couldn't you go into gated communities?
Again, these are very limited cases. Most of them we went there either only doing the listing, or we went there to do both listing and enumeration concurrently. But there are pockets of areas that we simply did not get there because of the management structure of these communities, i.e. you need the security person to walk our enumerators house to house. So depending on the availability of the security officer, the residents, and the window that we had, we were not. And in our last submission ahead of bringing the data collection exercise to a closure, we did indicate that these numbers that we are talking about are less than 300 in the 8 districts that we had in Greater Accra. And that is why yesterday we indicated that the difference between the provisional and the final is expected to be very marginal, especially when we had compared it with our own population projection and the projections from the UN population and the US Census Bureau.
So for these areas, you're saying that you're going to estimate?
We will estimate these localities. We would estimate their populations. And let's also keep in mind that we are currently doing a post-enumeration survey. The essence of the post-enumeration survey is to bring closure to the enumeration, to say that the enumeration is within this percentage margin of error as you indicated. And what we expect based on the comparison that we've done so far is to contain that level of comparison between the enumeration, the PES, and for that matter, the international benchmarks that I mentioned.
From some of the challenges you've just highlighted, I get the impression that you may have encountered quite a number of challenges in trying to put this together. What are some of the very tough ones you had to overcome?
I would confirm that there were some challenges, and indeed they were anticipated. So it's not something that we didn't see these challenges coming up. The COVID-19 imposed its own challenges with the census taking. People were very careful because of the environment that we all found ourselves in.
They didn't know where the census official is coming from to enter their home, whether they should allow the person.
Exactly. But with the help of, again, a digital census and our engagement with key persons in the country and agencies, most of these issues were surmounted. So, for instance, because it was a digital census, we set up for the first time a call center that dispense both inbound and outbound calls. And the inbound calls were very helpful to the extent that people who had concerns on the credibility of whoever the enumerator is had a window to make access to our call center. And again, for the first time, this call center had a toll-free number. So it was very useful in addressing a number of the challenges that we had. When we had challenges with the foreign community, we had a close working relationship with the Ghana Immigration Service, especially in the Ghana East District, which helped in resolving some of the challenges that we had. Indeed, with the gated communities that I talked about, we had to go to the level of the regional minister for Greater Accra to get some conversation or some strategy to see how we can get into these gated communities. So yes, we did have some challenges, but thankfully we surmounted all of them.
All right, so what next? We're expecting the final report on in November, and then subsequently you're talking about a whole lot more that we should expect to be released.
So between now and 18th of November, we're going to put out there what we call proximity analysis. So essentially we're going to do three levels of analysis where we're going to compare the distances between residential units and essential services. So it's going to tell us on the average the distance between somebody's residence and a health facility, somebody's residence and an educational facility, or a financial institution, or a market for that matter. And we're also going to do the analysis between essential services, how far apart are hospitals within a particular geographical area, how far apart are banks within a geographical area. And then from a security point of view, we're going to estimate the distances between different residences. And that is what we call the residential segregation. And we're looking forward to doing this analysis between now and the 19th of October. So on the 19th of October, we're going to put out that report, which is essentially proximity analysis based on essential services and residences. Then on the 18th of November, we'll put out the general report, which will have the final numbers. As I indicated, we're going to have thematic reports. You'll recall that the census questionnaire had 11 modules. We're going to go beyond the 11 modules and have 23 thematic reports, which we're going to put out there between May 2022 and December 2022. So some of the thematic areas would be education, economic activity, persons with difficulty in performing activities, housing, migration, sanitation. And we don't limit it to only the 11. That is why we have 23 of them. We're going to begin to look at the relationship between the census data and the Sustainable Development Goals. And that is why yesterday, the report that we launched, we had the three logos down there, the African Agenda 2063, Ghana's Coordinated Program, and the SDGs. So the thematic report will look at how the census data speaks to these development goals, the Africa Agenda 2063, the Ghana Coordinated Program, and the Sustainable Development Goals. And we're going to do some selected analysis, like gender analysis. That is where we're going to better appreciate the conversation of the implications of females outnumbering males, and how that compares with other socioeconomic indicators. Then, over a 2-year period, we're going to do analytical reports. And we're looking forward to doing 80 of these analytical reports, which we're going to roll out 20 of them on a 6-month basis over the 2-year period. From my point of view, what persons in Ghana should make adequate use of is the interactiveness that we are bringing on the use of the census data. So we're going to have on our website what we are calling a statistics compiler. So you can go on our website, select whatever variables that you are interested in, and see how they play out within your own locality. So even if our reports are restricted to some kind of analysis, as an individual, you don't need any statistics background. You can simply go to our website and then see how the numbers will play out. And obviously, we're going to put these things out spatially. So we're going to have the atlases and put the micro data out there for further analysis.
At what point do we compare the population growth that we have in Ghana, for instance, to, let's say, a South Korea?
I mean, the time is now. Now that the release that we did.
The data that's available now,
Yes.
is that enough for us to do that kind of comparison and say, vis-a-vis development?
So two things here. One is cross-country analysis in terms of population growth rate.
Yeah.
And what we put out there yesterday, we can easily do the cross-country analysis in terms of the population growth rate. So yesterday, we put out there that the population growth rate between 2010 and 2021 was 2.1. How does this compare internationally with South Korea and other countries? Then the other question is the population growth rate vis-a-vis development. And this is where we're going to get into and the indicators that you're going to use for development. So as we speak, in the second quarter of 2021, our GDP grew by 3.9. So if you want to compare population with GDP as an indicator for development, you can do that now.
Yeah.
But if you want to compare the population growth rate with, let's say, poverty, vulnerability, and so on, these are the analysis that we're going to further do when we are doing the thematic and the analytical report.
I know the census figures are something that the businesses are really keen on, laying their hands on. How soon can this become available to businesses that may be interested, because they will probably want to use that for planning and all of that and developing products?
Again, I'll say the time is now. As I indicated, what businesses really need is the data that we're going to put out there on the 19th of October, the proximity analysis. So as a business person, what you are interested in is where I want to site my business, what are the characteristics of the persons living there, and what are the other amenities there. So you want to site your business in, let's say, Adabraka. You'll be interested in whether there's a bank close by so that people can easily access the bank. You'd want to find out whether there's a health facility, whether there's an education there, so that you see the extent to which people can take up whatever commodity that you are putting out there. So the businesses for now, I think, should put themselves forward and say that Ghana Statistical Service, can you do A, B, C, D for us?
All right.
And we are thinking about having a business hub where we're going to engage the businesses to come and tell us their needs in terms of what business they want to cite, and then we'll provide the needed data.
Of course, at a fee.
Indeed, that is what we're looking forward to doing, because this is a specialized data that we want to put out there. And this will be definitely at the aggregated and anonymized level.
But if they want the thematic reports that you're looking at putting out over the next 2 years, will they have to pay for them? Or
no, the thematic reports, the micro data, that is 1 or 10% of the data, the analytical reports, all that are free. These are specialized data that specific businesses would need. So for instance, if you are citing a pharmacy, your needs will be different from somebody citing up a school. And these thematic report and analytical report cannot give those details. And that is where we say that definitely we need to compensate for the extra effort that will be put into getting this out.
So I see that as a way of the Ghana Statistical Service also generating some internal, some revenue for itself. What are some of the other ways you're looking at making money so that all that has been invested in the census you can recoup somehow?
So currently our thinking is to focus on 2 broad dimensions to become self-sufficient. And that is a distant goal. When I say distant, I mean something within 10 years. I don't want us to think about distance beyond 10 years. To become self-sufficient because of the struggle that we've had in collecting data consistently, regularly to inform policy. So as an agency, we're looking forward to becoming self-sufficient, financially self-sufficient. And there are 2 things that we are looking out there. We are very mindful of data sharing, international obligations. So we're going to put out data. We're not going to sell data.
Okay.
We are aware of the obligations to put out reports. So we're going to move away from the selling of reports and all that. From our point of view, that is not what we should do to become financially self-sufficient. So 2 things that we're going to do is what you are talking about, people who need specific tabulations to inform their business decision making. This is an individual or an agency that requires data for profit making. So definitely it lends itself to make money out of that. Then the second aspect is continue to strengthen the capacity of Ghana Statistical Service to service not just the other MDAs and the MMDAs, but the entire statistical community that we have in the country. So if you go to other jurisdictions, and I'm happy you talked about South Korea, or Korea for that matter, these are agencies, statistical agencies in these countries that have been able to build their statistical agencies' capacity to an extent that they offer capacity building and coordinate activities in the entire statistical system. And that is why last 2 years, our focus was to get a new law that mandates Ghana Statistical Service to coordinate activities around statistics in the country. And by so doing, we have our code of practice, we've just developed our competency framework, and then we started developing capacity in-house to have that responsibility. So through training, we hope to get some resources to sort of service the surveys and censuses, or for that matter, non-traditional data that we use for our work.
Right. Thank you very, very much. We're very privileged that you joined us in the studio to give us all this enlightenment. I'm sure there's a whole lot more that we can talk about, because you seem to have so much more in your head that you're willing to pour out. But we appreciate that you made time to be with us. Professor Samuel Kobna Enim is the Chief Census Officer, and he's the government statistician. And yes, we have the stats out there, the census data is out there. So for the businesses that you're interested in, you can go in for the census figures. And well, later on when the other reports come out, I'm looking at a business, for instance, going in to say, okay, if there are so many containers here that do not have toilet facilities, then it means that if I set up a toilet around a public toilet around this area, I know that people can patronize, and I can make some money off that. And so there's a lot more that we can use all this data for. But yes, you're still on the AM show, and we have more conversations coming up. We're going to be talking about what the Economic and Organized Crimes Office is doing. Apparently, there are some people out there who are going, or they're bent on defrauding people. So many of you would have gotten this text message, the text message on your screen right now. I got mine on September 2. And it says, Yoko wishes to caution all salaried workers to desist from involving third parties in the acquisition of loans. Anyone who transacts business with such persons does so at their own risk. Thank you. So I sought to find out why Yoko is sending out these messages. It turns out that they're loan scammers. We'll be having this conversation with Yoko to tell you how you can avoid falling victim to these loan scammers. There's a whole lot more coming up. Do stay tuned in. We're back in a minute.